Greetings, this is Dr. Joe Green, head pastor of St. Paul's Missionary Baptist Church, also the founder of the 2019 movement, located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and I want to share a couple of thoughts with you. If you've been keeping track of our Decoding or Unlocking Mystery Babylon in the series, this would be part 4 of it, and I want to share a couple of things with you regarding that, and just to lay some groundwork here. You know, when we talk about the Mystery Babylon system that the Bible talks about, we're talking about the New World Order, the one world governmental system that is moving forward and trying to, move into place throughout the world. It's basically 3 parts. So we have the Mystery Babylon religion, we have the economic or financial system, and we also have the governmental system. And so the religious system, the foundation of the one world government Mystery Babylon religious system, is located in Rome, in Vatican City, and the financial or banking portion of that is located in London, England, and then the political / military industrial complex is located in Washington, D.C. Now, those are the 3 capitals of the Mystery Babylon one world system, New World Order. And all 3 of them have has one primary similarity, I should say. All 3 of them are sovereign entities. So Vatican City is in Rome, but it's not part of Rome. It's its own corporate entity. London is in the middle of England, but it's not it is its own individual corporate entity, sovereign corporate entity, as is Washington, D.C. is not part of the 50 United States. It is its own corporate entity. And so those are the 3 capitals of the New World Order, Mystery Babylon system. And so, you know, the foundation of that is from Europe, primarily from Germany, and those who are in Germany, and they've influenced the rest of England, the rest of Europe, I should say, and England, and then that spilled over into the United States. And so that is the foundation of this system. Now, I'm going to give you a scripture, and then I'm going to talk about one of the aspects of this system, more specifically how this system is able to, some of the strategies, or I should say some of the things that the system uses in order to gain power and control the masses. Because the basis for the Mystery Babylon system, New World Order, is you have a small class of what's known as the ruling elite, or the Illuminati, or those who are part of these secret societies. It's a small minority of people who believe that they have the wisdom and the authority to rule the rest of the world. And within that context, there are organizations, international organizations, that they use. So you have the bloodline families that they believe are part of the ruling class that has, thousands of years old, from the pharaohs in Egypt to the Caesars in Rome, and different leaders. So they believe that they're part of those bloodline families. And then they also have these organizations that do their bidding and help to push their agenda. So organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, Skull and Bones, Bohemian Grove, all of these are organizations, secret societies and organizations that are under the umbrella of the globalists, and they carry out their agenda. They help carry out their agenda. But anyway, let's talk about one in particular, one of the tools or weapons that they use in order to gain power and to promote their agenda. So in Revelation 18:23, the Bible reads, "And the light of the candle, and the light of a candle shall shine no more in all of thee, and the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived." For by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. Now that word sorceries in the Greek comes from the word pharmakia. And pharmakia, of course, means medication. Pharmacy is where we get the word pharmacy from. Pharmaceuticals, which are drugs. That is, by extension, magic, literal or figurative, sorcery or witchcraft. That word pharmakia is what the Bible translates as sorceries or witchcraft. Now, why is that important? That's important because it talks about the merchants of the Mystery Babylon system, and it talks about some of the other things. We're going to get into other aspects of it, but today we're going to focus on that word sorceries and how they use sorceries or pharmakia, the spirit of pharmakia, in order to control the masses. And again, remember, we're talking about a ruling elite class, a small secret class of people that believe that they have the authority to not only govern, but to set the course and the direction for the rest of the world. Now, one of the things that they did historically that we know about is you had the British some British and American companies that actually would transport opium into China. And you had what was known as the First Opium War, and it was fought over illegal opium trade, financial reparations, and diplomatic status. It began, the First Opium War began in 1839 because in the late 18th century, the British East India Company, or EIC, contravening Chinese laws, began smuggling Indian opium to China through various means and became the leading suppliers by 1773. By 1787, the company was illegally sending 4,000 chests of opium to China a year. And the Chinese Zhang Emperor passed many decrees or edicts making opium trade illegal in 1729, in 1799, in 1814, and 1831, but smuggling still occurred as the British paid smugglers to take opium into China, causing the population to become more and more addicted to opioids. Or opium, I should say. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but you got to realize that China was under British rule for a long time, and so in various times, this time in particular, they got to a place where they were going to rise up, get strong as a community, and push the British out of their country. And so, what these British companies did is they smuggled opium into China. And so many of the Chinese became addicted to opium. Now, you guys are going to hear some similarities moving forward in this and how it is. But that is one of the older historical records of this happening. But I'm going to talk to you and tell you how that wasn't that wasn't an anomaly. It has happened and continues to happen over time. But let's get back to this. So some of the individual American opium smugglers, some Americans entered the trade by smuggling opium from Turkey into China as well. And some of the individual American opium smugglers included the grandfather of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So his middle name was Delano, but it was his mother's maiden name, so Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and ancestors of Secretary of State John Forbes Carey. So again, John Kerry, the former presidential candidate and Secretary of State, his middle name is Forbes, but that was his mother's maiden name. So by 1833, the number of chests of opium trafficked into China soared to 30,000, according to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Samuel Russell founded the Russell and Company, and they were big in the opium trade business. In 1830, the company merged with Thomas and Perkins, J&T H. Perkins of Boston, established in Canton in 1806 by John Perkins Cushing. And Perkins' nephew was then led by another two nephews, brothers Robert Bennett Forbes and John Murray Forbes. Their illegal trade at the time in Turkish opium via the island of Linton in the Pearl River estuary was particularly lucrative. So you had Russell and Company. You also had the British East Indian Company. These were two of the major corporations. And they were really tied in together in smuggling opium from Turkey into China. And there was a huge addiction problem in China because of all the opium that was coming into the country illegally. Now, Russell and Company, this is important that you understand who Russell and Company is. I'm going to tie all this together, so please pay attention. So you had the Forbes family, which we talked about. John Kerry's maiden name, he comes from the Forbes family. So John Murray Forbes was the brother of R.B. Forbes and the great-grand-uncle of 2004 presidential candidate John Forbes Carey. You had, of course, William Delano Jr. He was the father of Franklin Roosevelt, who's the 32nd president of the United States. And in the 1860s, he joined and served as chief of operations of Russell and Company in Canton. And so there's all these things are tied in together. But let's get back to William Russell for a little bit. William Huntington Russell was an American businessman, educator, and politician. He's from the Russell family as well. Notably, he was a co-founder, along with Alphonso Taft, and Taft should be a familiar name to you as well, of Yale University's secret society known as Skull and Bones. Skull and Bones, also known as the Order 322, or also known as the Brotherhood of Death, is an undergraduate senior secret student society at Yale University in Connecticut. And so the oldest senior class society at the University of Skull and Bones has become a cultural institution known for its powerful alumni and various conspiracy theories, it says here. But we know that they're not theories, that they are actual truths. The secret society's alumni organization, the Russell Trust Association, owns the organization's real estate and oversees the membership. And so the Russell Trust, William Huntington Russell was the co-founder of Skull and Bones. Now, we already established that Russell and Company was good with, or they gained a lot of wealth by smuggling opium into China to weaken China from being able to overthrow the British. Now, Alphonso Taft was an American jurist, a diplomat, politician, attorney general and Secretary of War under President Ulysses S. Grant. He was also the founder of the American political dynasty and father of President and Chief Justice William Howard Taft. So his son becomes the president. He was also the Chief Justice. So we tie in the legal system with drugs and with military because it's important for us to understand how they were tied in. That was one of the strategies that they used. Russell and Company merged with Boston Syndicate and became the primary American opium smuggler. Many of the great American European fortunes were built on China opium trade. Also, with some of the families that we're going to mention, not only did they get wealthy from smuggling opium and other drugs, but many of them were involved in the transatlantic slave trade as well. One of Russell and Company's chief operations in Canton was, of course, Warren Delano, the grandfather of Franklin Roosevelt, and some of the other partners include John Cleve Green, who financed Princeton University, A. Bill Lowe, who financed construction of Columbia University, and Columbia is going to be an important piece of the puzzle as well, Joseph Coolidge, and the Perkins, Sturgis, and Forbes family. Coolidge's son organized the United Fruit Company, and his grandson Archibald C. Coolidge was a co-founder of the Council of Foreign Relations. And of course, if you recall, I mentioned the Council of Foreign Relations, which is one of the globalist organizations that actually helped to push the agenda of the one world government, New World Order. Now, William Huntington Russell, Samuel's cousin, studied in Germany from 1831 to 1832. And was a hotbed of new ideas. As I mentioned about Germany, Germany is important. If you get a chance and look through my YouTube channel, I have one of my videos is on the Synagogue of Satan, and I break down who they are. They originated in the Caucasoid Mountains in the Turkey region. The Bible calls it Pergamum, and they were adherers to this Mystery Babylon religion. They were also phallic symbol worshippers. They migrated from there into Germany. And their descendants are the Rothschild family, for one, and so many things that they created. But it's interesting. It's important to know about Germany and their role in the Illuminati and the ideology behind the New World Order. The scientific method was being applied to all forms of human endeavor. It was known as Prussia. Germany was known as Prussia before it was called Germany. Now, our educational system in the United States is based on the Prussian model. And the reason that's so important to understand is that during the time of the World Wars, one of the criticisms was that they got defeated by Napoleon in 1806 and some of the other in World War I as well, because people didn't buy in as much, that people began to think about themselves in the stress of battle, and they took, instead of thinking about the collective or the state. And so because of that, they formed the educational system as a way to make people more loyal to the state and not think as much as individuals. That was the purpose behind it. That's what the American school system is based on, the Prussian model, it's called. They took principles set by John Locke and Jean Rousseau and created this educational system. We're talking about the Prussian model. John Fitch, in his address to the German people, declared that the children would be taken over by the state and told what to think and how to think it. That is the ultimate goal of the philosophy behind the public school system, is to create people that fit into boxes instead of being individual free thinkers. So it's important to understand that. Another person that you should know is George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. He took over Fitch's chair at the University of Berlin in 1817, was a professor there until his death. Hegel was the culmination of the German idealistic philosophy school of Immanuel Kant. Now, Hegel is important, or Hegel, if you will. You hear me talk a lot about the Hegelian dialectic. And so Hegel, along with these other philosophers, really believed that the ruling elite were the ones who were supposed to determine the direction of the world. And so they should be in charge. And they came up with strategies on how to get the people as a whole to follow their lead and not to rebel against their leadership. So the Hegelian dialectic is something where you talk about they had a predetermined direction they wanted things to go into, and they use what is known as thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. What does that mean? Thesis, antithesis, and synthesis is a way to get people to go in the direction you want to by controlling both sides of the argument. And so they control both sides of the argument, and then of course they lead people into a natural direction that they already had preconceived. They also have, many people have used examples. People have said, like for instance, 9/11, that they wanted people to give up their individual rights, constitutional rights. And so they had what's known as false flags, or they had situations that would happen. They would have a tragedy that would occur, and people would willingly go in the direction that they determined. So, for instance, with 9/11, some people believed that they wanted people to give up their individual rights, and they also wanted to go into Iraq in order to capture the oil. And so many people have speculated that 9/11 was allowed to happen so that the people would give up their rights. So you had the Patriot Act that comes into place. And then they also, people were so traumatized and they were so angered by it that they willingly agreed to allow the United States to go into Iraq, right? To invade Iraq and Afghanistan, but Iraq. And so we're going to get back to Afghanistan as well. But that's the ideology behind that. Those are the theories behind it. There was also something called the Gulf of Tonkin, and the Gulf of Tonkin, which was a false flag. One of the admirals later on admitted that they staged an attack on an American ship in the Asian waters, and they blamed it on the Vietnamese. And the American people willingly allowed us to go to war in Vietnam because of it. So that's the idea of when you talk about Hegel's philosophy. So, and again, Vietnam, just like Afghanistan, has a very interesting thing in common. And so we'll talk about that. But Vietnam, they went into Vietnam. And many people say that it was because of the Gulf of Tonkin incident where an American ship was attacked, and they blamed the Vietnamese. And so the American public agreed to allow us to go into Vietnam. Now, this has happened many times. In Rome, you had I think it was Nero, I believe. Nero, who was the emperor of the during the time of the Roman Empire, set buildings on fire in Rome and blamed Christians. And so he was able to get people to support oppressing Christians because of that. During the time of Germany, in Nazi Germany, they actually had some people dress up in certain uniforms, and they attacked some soldiers, and because of that, they allowed the Nazis to gain power. So this has happened. This is one of the strategies that has been used over time throughout history. And Hegel was one of the people who really helped to perfect that for the New World Order people, and they've been using the Hegelian dialectic ever since in many different instances. So anyway, Hegel, our world is a world of reason. The state is absolute reason, and the citizens can only become free by worship and obedience to the state. Hegel called the state the march of God in the world and the final end. This final end, Hegel said, has supreme right against the individual whose supreme duty is to be a member of the state. Both fascism and communism have their philosophical roots in Hegelism. Hegelian philosophy was very much vogue during William Russell's time in Germany. And so, again, it is the idea that individuals don't have rights, but they are to be treated as just part of the state. Now, ultimately, think about it. Even though on the surface, communism and those things give the impression that it's trying to be a better, kinder society. But ultimately, you got to think about who's going to be in charge of the state. So you have this ruling elite class who's going to be in charge of the state, which means ultimately power won't be given to the people, it'll be given to the state. And there are people that are ahead of the state, this remnant, this ruling elite class, and they will be able to determine the fate of the rest of the world. And so that's what they're believing, that they have the right to do, and that the masses won't know how to govern themselves. That's the whole philosophy behind the New World Order. And the Bible talks about it over and over again. And it began to be perfected and originated during the time of Nimrod, because Nimrod at the Tower of Babel, he was governing the people, and he saw the people as a commodity. Instead of seeing them as individuals that have unique gifts and talents, and their unique gifts and talents were God-given, he ultimately looked at the people as a commodity only to be used to build up his kingdom. And that's the same philosophy behind the New World Order, but we have to get more understanding in order for us to see through the narrative that is given to us. Anyway, let's get back to Skull and Bones, because Hegelian philosophy was very much in vogue during William Russell's time in Germany. The family names of Skull and Bones include, you're probably familiar with some of these, like I mentioned, the Taft, which William Howard Taft was one of the former presidents of the United States, the Whitney family, Harriman, Weyerhaeuser, Pinchot, Rockefeller, Goodyear, Sloan, Stimson, Phelps, Perkins, Pillsbury, Kellogg, Vanderbilt, Bush, Lovett, and so on. And of course, you heard me say Vanderbilt and Bush, but Bush is a name that you guys should be familiar with and recognize, and their role in not only the Skull and Bones, but moving forward and as we tie this all together. In August the 16th of 1987, New York Times article reads, to a remarkable extent, the ethos first of the World War II Office of Strategic Services and then of its offspring, the CIA, was influenced by Yale men and therefore presumably by Yale. The CIA, so the New York Times article acknowledges that Yale University was very influential in the creation of the CIA. First it was the OSS, and then it became the CIA, and it was some of the people in Skull and Bones that helped to create this. The CIA, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, desperate for solid intelligence, was frustrated by the piecemeal stovepipe information these agencies were providing to solve the problem. He created the Office of Coordinator of Information, also known as the COI. The COI was the forerunner to the OSS, and the OSS is the forerunner to the CIA. Now, it's important to understand this, and we're going to tie all this in together. So you have Russell and family, who made their wealth off of, in part, or to a large part, shipping opium into China to weaken the Chinese community. You have them coming to help form the Skull and Bones, which we have former presidents. We have all these various very influential people that were part of it. And then the Skull and Bones creates the COI, which creates the OSS, which created the CIA, what we know now as the CIA. And they use the same strategy that they've always used. There's a Yale University scholar by the name of Alfred McCoy. He wrote a book called The Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia. It was published in 1972. And he talks about the ongoing relationship between drug trafficking and the CIA has been fairly common knowledge for the past 45 years and was well documented by Alfred McCoy, a PhD candidate in Southeast Asian history at Yale University. He was a PhD candidate at Yale University. And he published a book in 1972, as I said, The Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia. So this is not a new phenomenon. This is something that is pretty well known and documented. So we think about in the 50s and 60s, you had the American Army in Vietnam. And at the time, Vietnam was one of the number one producers of poppy in the world. And poppy is where you get opium from. And so there's another thing was happening in the 50s and 60s and early 70s was what was known as the Harlem Renaissance. And so in Harlem, New York, you had the black community that was really building up. Business, entertainment, the culture was really, really raising up. But then all of a sudden you get a flood of heroin into Harlem at the same time that the United States Army is in Vietnam, the most powerful army in the world. But yet somehow or another, heroin was flooding the streets of Harlem from Vietnam. There's a movie called American Gangster with Denzel Washington, and the gentleman's name was Frank Lucas, and he was a huge drug dealer in Harlem, New York. And there's a part in the movie that shows he had a cousin who was in the army and how they were shipping heroin from Vietnam into the United States. Now, of course, we know if the if the army was there, the government was there, and they had to have known about huge amounts of drugs coming from Vietnam into the United States. Also, let's look at the crack cocaine epidemic, right? Now, this is from the Department of Justice website. It's a report from the Department of Justice, and it reads, allegations that the Contras were involved in the drug trade and the government agencies condoned or had knowledge of these activities are not new. DEA intelligence analyst Douglas Everett told the OIG that in the mid-1980s, DEA had heard rumors and had gathered some uncorroborated information about the involvement of the Nicaraguan Sandinista government in drug dealing, but that the issue of the Contras did not come up until 1986. Now, this is these are allegations that were made, of course, and we know a little bit more information about it, but these specific allegations were raised by the Mercury News article and elsewhere that our primary focus of our report can be summarized as follows. The article suggests that the federal government protected Danilo Blandon from investigation and prosecution for drug trafficking so that he could provide drug money to the Contras. According to this claim, Blandon may have been tipped off by CIA and other government entities to the execution of search warrant on his residence and business in October 1986, and a federal investigation of Blandon in 1987 was closed because of Blandon's connections to the Contras or the CIA. In addition, the suggestion was made that Blandon received inappropriately lenient treatment after he was arrested for drug trafficking in 1992, and he improperly received a green card at this time. The article suggests that Blandon's drug trafficking was connected to the CIA. The article stated that during testimony before a federal grand jury in San Francisco in 1994, I want you to hear this, Blandon implied that his cocaine sales were for a time CIA approved. In addition, the series claimed that the federal prosecutors blocked certain testimony in the 1990 trial of Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies accused of corruption, and in a trial of Ricky Ross, and you guys probably heard of his freeway Ricky Ross. There's a rapper who stole his name and his identity, but there was an original Ricky Ross who was considered one of the largest drug dealers ever, dealing crack cocaine in Los Angeles and other parts of the world. So anyway, this trial, what they were trying Ricky Ross, they were also accusing Los Angeles County Sheriff deputies of corruption, but they suppressed the testimony. In 1996, because the testimony may have revealed the CIA's ties to Blandon's drug money raised for the Contras. The article alleged that Ross and Blandone were the prime contributors to the rise of crack cocaine in Los Angeles and across the nation. Allegedly, cocaine was not available in South Central Los Angeles until they made it widely available, and the drug network of Ross and Blandone was the catalyst for the crack epidemic that erupted in the 1980s across the entire nation, not just in Los Angeles. So, of course, in the 80s, you have the crack cocaine. In the 90s, the crack cocaine epidemic, but it mainly attacked the black communities, right? So you had a rising black community, but now the crack cocaine epidemic hits. And then you have the Clinton crime bill of 1994 that gave stiffer sentences to crack cocaine, which, based on these reports, it was the CIA was accused of being a part of that. If you guys remember Oliver North and the Iran-Contra scandal, Oliver North talked about some of the corruption that was taking place and with the government's oversight. So anyway, these are things that were reported, and there's two movies that recently came out to confirm this. You have Tom Cruise's movie, which was called American Made, and this movie was done from the perspective of a pilot who was supposedly the cocaine runner that was running cocaine from South America into Arkansas, landing them in Arkansas to be distributed around the country. And the governor of Arkansas at the time was Bill Clinton, who later created the 1994 Clinton crime bill. So this movie confirms the accusations of what we're talking about. There was another movie called Kill the Messenger with Jeremy Renner, and I think that was 2015. And it talked about Gary Webb, who was the reporter for the Mercury News, who actually cracked this article that we're talking about. And mysteriously, Gary Webb, it's reported that he committed suicide by shooting himself in the head twice. And so, of course, obviously, you can't shoot yourself in the head twice. If you shoot yourself in the head, you most likely won't be able to shoot yourself again. So I think that was sending a message that he should have left well enough alone. Now, these are the accusations, of course, and this is based on documents and testimony that I'm reading from. So it's not like I'm just making this stuff up. This is well documented, and you can find this out for yourself. He also wrote a book. Gary Webb wrote a book called The Conspiracy of, I think it was The Conspiracy of Silence or something like that. I'll get the name for you. But if you get a chance to read the book, it was well published. I mean, it was published and people knew about it. It wasn't a secret that these things were occurring, and or they had been alleged, I should say. And the reason I say alleged because I wasn't actually there. I wasn't there when this stuff happened, so I don't know, but all the evidence points to this being an actual occurrence. So anyway, we see this over and over again, and of course we see it's a pattern when the CIA is involved, that there's drugs and there's legalities and there's money involved, and the army and the military. So Dark Alliance, Gary Webb wrote the book Dark Alliance. So when you get a chance, and you can also look online, and Freeway Ricky Ross, the person in question, he testifies to the same things, that this stuff was actually happening, and he found out that his connection that was helping to bring in a whole bunch of cocaine into the country was working with the CIA. So here's another part of this report. The articles reported also that in 1984, the federal prosecutors in San Francisco returned to Julio Zavala, a drug trafficker who had ties to the Contras. They returned $36,800 to him that had been seized from him. The article attributed the return of the money to the government's tolerance of drug trafficking activities by the Contras. In addition, we reviewed allegations that Zavala and fellow drug trafficking Carlos Cabezas dealt cocaine for the Contras in San Francisco in the early 1980s. And so all this documentation that we have here, that all points to the same thing. It's the same pattern that has always been used. And then when you look in now in 2019, going into 2020, we have an opioid epidemic. And the interesting thing about it is that the United States Army, or I should say military, is in Afghanistan, who is the number one producer of poppy, which is opium. You get opium from them. So we see the same pattern. And again, the Bible talks about that. It talks about, this Mystery Babylon New World Order system that deceives the world through sorceries, which is pharmakia or drugs. When you also look at the pharmaceutical industry and how many people are on psychotropic drugs now, and how many drugs now have so many side effects, and you might know this or may not, but more people die from pharmaceutical drugs every year than any other method of death. So, but anyway, stay tuned. We're going to have more of our decoding or unlocking Mystery Babylon. But today we're talking about sorceries the Bible talks about, which is pharmakia or witchcraft, and how that has come into play historically and still today is affecting us as a way to try to move us into what the Bible talks about as being Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of our harlots, and the abominations of the earth. And so anyway, stay tuned. There's more to come. We encourage you to share these videos and let people know about the information, and possibly sow into what God is doing here. Our job is to pull the covers back off this system, this end time system, because the Bible tells us for us to know the devices and the schemes of the enemy so that he does not gain the advantage over us. And so anyway, until next time, peace and blessings to you. Talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.